Hello there, and welcome to the Second Life Book Club. My name is Draxtor Dupre, and today on the show, AC Wise, writer, blogger, Peter Pan aficionado, or maybe not quite. She wrote a wonderful book called Wendy Darling, which is out in June, and you should pre-order it now. Actually, somebody in the audience, please look up the pre-order link right now and spam us every 5 minutes. I demand it. Wendy Darling is a sequel of sorts to J.M. Barrie's 1911 book Peter Pan. It's quite a bit darker than the original and certainly darker than the 1953 Disney movie that probably most of us associate with Peter Pan, at least I do. Uh, Before we welcome AC, let's get into the mood by having Peter's shadow, who is standing by here on stage. Peter's shadow is here with us and have him read the first page of the original Peter Pan. And I would also like, while he's reading it, the in-world audience, please share in local chat what Peter Pan means to you. What do you remember when you first read it or listened? Maybe your mom read it to you as a child. Maybe you watched the movie or you watched one of the newer movies. What grabbed you? What enlightened you? And what possibly disturbed you? Here we go. Peter, take it away. This is the first page of Peter Pan.
All children, except one, grow up. They soon know that they will grow up, and the way Wendy knew was this. One day, when she was 2 years old, she was playing in a garden, and she plucked another flower and ran with it to her mother. I suppose she must have looked rather delightful, for Mrs. Darling put her hand to her heart and cried, "Oh, why can't you remain like this forever?" This was all that passed between them on the subject, but henceforth Wendy knew that she must grow up. You always know after you are two. Two is the beginning of the end.
Thank you so much, Peter. Now you can sit down in the audience if you find a seat. Now, welcome A.C. Wise, author of novellas, author of short stories, essays, the forthcoming Wendy Darling out in June. And the pre-order link is in the local chat, titanbooks.com. AC, how are you? Welcome to the Second Life Book Club.
I am doing very well. Thank you so much for having me here. I am delighted to be here, and I just love that this is the set, the pirate ship, the bedroom window, all wonderful. So thank you.
What is this avatar? What does the avatar mean to you? Why did you choose this avatar when we first requested your input?
Well, I have two corgis, one of whom is actually sleeping at my feet right now. And I just couldn't resist the idea of getting to do a book club as a corgi. And my avatar actually looks remarkably like my younger corgi, down to the floofy tail, the coloring, and the classic corgi sploot that she does, which let's see if I hit the flop button here, demonstrates exactly that pose. Of
Wow.
course,
And
my dog doesn't have the purple glowy eyes, but the rest, the coloring is pretty similar.
was just gonna say, you have some interestingly colored corgis at home.
She does have two colored eyes though. She has brown and blue in each of her eyes, so she's very striking looking. And then the other one is the much more classic corgi, the Pembroke corgi with the sort of, the red and white, the brown eyes, but they do both have tails.
Now, I just read a little bit of, and we're going to go deep into Peter Pan and how you came up with your own world built on the original. And I have to say, the weird thing is, I read Peter Pan for the first time. I think a couple of years ago for the first time. I mean, I had some sort of movie type novelization as a kid that was lying around, and then I remember the film, but the book stayed with me, and in such a powerful way, and I couldn't believe that my mother never read it to me. Maybe because I'm German, I don't know. But then I remember, of course, the ubiquitous Disney movie, which is not bad, from 1953. That one, it's certainly a popular culture sort of mainstay, an iconic movie. before I ask you what Peter Pan meant to you or means to you, the book, the story, the concept of Neverland, what people are saying here in the chat, Damon says, I never liked the crocodile. He ate people's hands. I don't care if he ate the bad guy's hand, he still ate hands. AJ McDowell says, my favorite quote, you know that place between sleep and awake, the place where you can still remember dreaming. That's where I'll always love you. That's where I'll be waiting. That's from the film, and AJ says, I've got it hanging on a picture in my house. And Lena remembers a fairy. So what does Peter Pan mean to you? And Neverland, which we are, I guess, we're in right now, in a way.
Well, it's always just sort of been a fascinating story to me, and I think even the original, I'm trying to remember exactly what my first exposure to it was. Actually, might have been seeing a version of the play, and I
Hmm.
think I also had sort of an abridged audiobook version that I listened to a lot as a kid. Um, and it's just sort of an interesting world. And then sort of the more I looked back on it, as an adult, just realizing, there is an awful lot of darkness there, which was part of what inspired me to want to explore that world further. I mean, even that brief passage that Peter just read, it kind of starts with the realization that one day you'll grow up, which kind of eventually leads to, change, death. It's not spelled out, but there is that kind of recognition of mortality right there on the first page. And then, a refusal of it with Peter refusing to grow up. So
Hmm.
there's just a lot there in Peter Pan that's just interesting to explore.
This interesting, and if the camera could pan on the side here, we have actually that first quote here on the side of the ship, and right next to it is the last the last paragraph. And let me read that real quick. This is at the very end where Peter comes back, and there's this arrangement is made with Wendy that her daughter and her granddaughter, they can interact with Peter. And here, the very last paragraph is, as you look at Wendy, you may see her hair becoming white and her figure little again, for all this happened long ago. Jane, her daughter, is a common grown up with a daughter called Margaret, and every spring cleaning time, Peter comes from Margaret and takes her to Neverland, where she tells him stories about himself, to which he listens eagerly. When Margaret grows up, she will have a daughter who is to be Peter's mother in turn, and thus it will go on and on, so long as children are gay and innocent and heartless. That's the very last sentence. So that the children are gay and innocent, but they're also heartless. So it's like you said. I mean, it's kind of baked into the cake there, the darkness. And then you picked it up and ran with it, I guess.
Exactly. I mean, children are constantly just sort of going off, leaving their parents behind, not necessarily thinking about the fact that there could be somebody at home worrying about them. They're just off on having an adventure and not really thinking through the consequences of that, which is, again, something else I definitely wanted to explore with Wendy Darling, that sort of, you know, the heartless concept, the concept of just not even really putting too much thought into, the meaning behind all of it and the potential darkness that's there, which I think, definitely comes out in Wendy Darling, or hopefully that comes through that sort of, disturbingness that was baked in there right from the beginning in the original Peter Pan stories.
It's a really amazing book, and we'll have you read as well. Um, I put a slide up on our board here that Shyla, co-producer, prepared with a bunch of pictures here from this newer movie. I don't even know what that was called. Then the Finding Neverland, which is about the author James Barrie's story. Then an old black and white picture of a stage production. So there is numerous productions. There's a silent movie. Um, Before we get into the choices that you made for the story, AC, I mean, I have to applaud your confidence that with all this stuff out there, you were confident enough to pursue this. Um, you know that you knew you had your own take, and that take was one that hopefully resonated with audiences, and I think it will. By the way, it's out in June, and the pre-order link is in chat. But how do you? I mean, how do you get this? How do you get so so confident.
Well, I think the lovely thing about Peter Pan, even though, it's obviously started as a very specific work by a specific author, it has sort of that timeless feel and it has that fairy tale feel that kind of lends itself to being reimagined, reinterpreted, explored from multiple angles. So you can have all these versions of play, movie, book, story, and each one of them kind of feels fresh or looks at it from a slightly different angle. Kind of feels like a story that's always been around, even though it does, again, have a very specific, point when it was written and began existing. It just feels like it should be something older than that, that kind of leaves it open to interpretation and re-exploration.
Hmm.
And hopefully people will be able to find something new in my take on it.
What are the themes that were important to you? AJ actually says here in the chat, it seems to be always be about loss, the loss of childhood, the loss of children, Peter's loss of Wendy. Shyla in our pre-production meeting had a great question that was also on my run sheet. What is so bad about not wanting to grow up? I mean, this is to me actually the main theme that you explore, and I think you kind of give a really good answer to this conundrum here of um, not wanting to grow up because you want to retain imagination, you want to retain a freedom to pursue, um, but also you want to evade obviously responsibilities. But what are you sort of the main themes before you set out to write this, where you say, I'm going to hit these themes?
There were a couple different things that I wanted to look at. One was definitely the idea of mothers getting to go on adventure. I mean, sort of in the original story, you get the children going off, the parents being left behind, and in so many fairy tales and children's books and that sort of whole genre, you get a lot of either mothers who are dead or mothers who are left behind or mothers who are wicked, but they're not at the center of the story in sort of a protagonist kind of role. They're maybe, what's standing in the way of a child having an adventure, or they're the actual antagonist of the book, or they're just completely absent and left off the page. And I wanted sort of to, put motherhood sort of back at the center of the story and showing that, Wendy's life isn't over as a person just because she's a mother.
Hmm.
She still gets to have adventures of her own. She still gets to be a hero and to be the center of her story, and she doesn't need to fade into the background just because the next generation is coming along behind her.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that is definitely one of the big themes that I wanted to explore with the book, and um, again, sort of that the original darkness and also the question of what it means to not grow up, as you sort of said before. There is sort of that, you know, that ideal of holding on to innocence and holding on to dreaming and imagination. Um, but to me, sort of the flip side of it that I did want to look at in this book is, well, if you're just looking sort of at things on the surface and only focusing on what's beautiful and only focusing on imagination, then sort of then what is the other side of that? Who is the one who's being responsible? Who's the one cleaning up your messes when, you know,
Well,
you're
your
never looking
mother
back
is
as a
AC.
kid?
Haven't you read Jordan Peterson? Your mother is there to clean your room and make you a sandwich. That's
Exactly,
the
and then
role.
what happens when you're forced into the role of the mother, as Wendy is, as her daughter is, being expected to clean up after Peter and the Lost Boys. It's not exactly a fun, magical adventure for them if all they get to do is cook and clean and look after people and not actually, participate fully in the games. So
Hmm.
there's definitely sort of that evasion on the part of Peter of, the responsible side, the looking at the consequences of his actions and who might be hurt by his imagination and his games and his insistence on this is the way the world works.
Shyla is reminding us that J.M. Barrie's, and we're gonna get a taste in just a minute of Wendy Darling. Pre-order link. Pre-order link. We should have a heckler come on stage with a sign that has the pre-order link on it. Why are pre-orders so? Sorry, I get sidetracked, but this important question: Why are pre-orders so important, AC, in this sort of oversaturated world of
I
books.
think in general, it sort of, gives publishers the idea that, people are excited about the titles that they have coming up and gives them sort of the confidence to stick with authors and to, you know, continue to publish their work if they know there's sort of that built-in audience that's hungry for the things that are coming up.
Mhm. Shyla says here Barry's first idea for the title was Peter Pan. Instead of Peter Pan was the boy who hated mothers, actually.
I could definitely see that.
Mhm.
And I can see how that would not be necessarily a palatable marketing thing from the perspective of parents potentially, purchasing the book for their children or purchasing to
Mhm.
read for their children. So I could see maybe why that got changed.
Now I'm going to magically, because this is Neverland, you will see a little book stand just appearing right in front of you. And now I would like you to read a little bit from this wonderful book and please set up the scene for us. What are we? I think we're going right into somewhere at the beginning of the story.
Yeah, I'm actually going to start with the very first opening scene of the opening chapter of the book. So hopefully not too much establishing needs to be done because this is where everything starts. London, 1931. There is a boy outside her daughter's window. Wendy feels it like a trickle of starlight whispering in through a gap, a change in the very pressure and composition of the air. She knows, as sure as her own blood and bones, and that knowledge sends her running. Her hairbrush clatters to the floor in her wake, her bare feet fly over carpeted runners and slap wooden floorboards, past her husband's room and to her daughter's door. It's not just any boy, it's the boy, Peter. Every inch of her skin wakes and crawls. The fine hairs all along the back of her neck stand on end. The storm, secreted between her bones for years, finally breaking wide. Peter, here, now, after so long. She wants to shout, but she doesn't know what words, and as Wendy skids to a halt, her teeth are bared. It isn't a grimace or a smile, but a kind of animal breathing, panicked and wild. Jane's door stands open a crack. A sliver of moonlight, unnaturally bright as if carried to London from Neverland, spills across the floor. It touches Wendy's toes as she peers through the gap, unable for a moment to step inside. Even though she's still, her pulse runs rabbit quick. Backlit against that too bright light is the familiar silhouette, a slender boy with his fists planted on his hips, chest puffed out, and chin tipped up, his hair wild. There is no mistaking Peter as he hovers just beyond the second floor window. She blinks, and the image remains, not vanishing like every other dream stretched between now and then, between the girl she was and the woman she's become. Of course, Wendy thinks, because this may not be the house she grew up in, but it's still her home. Of course he would find her, and of course he would find her now. Bitterness chases the thought, here and now, after so long. At the same time, she thinks, no, please no, but his two long fingers already tap at the glass. Without waiting for her say-so, the window swings wide. Peter enters, and Wendy's heart swoops first, and then falls and falls and falls. Once invited, always welcome. That's his way. Peter doesn't notice Wendy as she pushes open the hall door all the way. He flies a circle around the ceiling, and she wills her daughter to stay asleep, wills her tongue to uncurl from the roof of her mouth. Her legs tremble, holding her on the threshold, wanting to fold and drop her to the floor. It's such an easy thing for him to enter, and yet her own body betrays her, refusing to take one step into her daughter's room in her own house. It's unfair. Everything about Peter always was, and it hasn't changed. After years of her wanting and waiting, lying and hoping, he's finally here. And he isn't here for her. Peter lands at the foot of Jane's bed. The covers barely dimple. He's a boy in form, but hollow all the way through. Maybe it's the motion or the light spearing in from the hall behind Wendy, but Jane half wakes, rubbing at her eyes. A shout of warning locks in Wendy's throat. Wendy, Peter says. Hearing him say her name, Wendy is a child again, toes lifting from the ground, taking flight, about to set off on a grand and delicious adventure. Except he's not looking at her. He's looking at Jane. Wendy bites the inside of her cheek, bites down in place of a scream. Does he have any idea how long it's been? Swallowing the red salt taste of her blood finally unlocks her throat. Peter, I'm here. It isn't the shout she wishes, only a half-whispered and ragged thing. Peter turns, his eyes bright as the moonlight behind him. They narrow. Suspicion first, and then a frown. Liar, he says, bold and sure. You're not Wendy. He makes as if to point at Jane. Evidence. But Wendy's answer stops him. I am. Does he hear the quaver as she tries to hold her voice steady? She should call Ned, her husband, downstairs in his study, either so absorbed in his books or asleep over them as to be oblivious to her flight down the hall. It's what a sensible person would do. There's an intruder in their home, in their daughter's room. Jane is in danger. Wendy swallows, facing Peter alone. It's me, Peter. I grew up. Peter's expression turns into a sneer. Jane forgotten, all his attention on Wendy now. Jane looks in confusion between them. Wendy wants to tell her daughter to run. She wants to tell her to go back to sleep. It's only a dream. But the mocking edge in Peter's voice needles her, pulling her focus away. What'd you go do that for? Wendy's skin prickles again, hot and cold. The set of his mouth, arrogant as ever, the flicker brightness of his eyes, daring her to adventure, daring her to defy his word as law. It happens. Wendy's voice steadies, anger edging out her fear. To most of us, at least. Peter, here, real, not a wild dream held as armor against the world. The years unspool around her as Wendy finally manages to step into her daughter's room. And that armor, polished and patched and fastened tight over the years, cracks. For a terrible moment, Jane is forgotten. Wendy is a creature made all of want, aching for the cold expression to melt from Peter's face, aching for her friend to take her hand and ask her to fly away with him. But his hand remains firmly planted on his hip, chin tilted so he can look down at her from his perch on the bed. Wendy takes a second step, and her armor is back in place. She takes a third step, and anger churns, stronger than desire. Wendy clamps her arms by her side, refusing to let one turn traitor, and reach towards Peter. She is no longer the heartbroken girl left behind. She is what she has made of herself over the years. She held on to the truth, even when Michael and John forgot. She survived being put away for her delusions, survived the injections, calmatives, and water cures meant to save her from herself. She fought and never stopped fighting. She refused to let Neverland go. It's been 11 years since St. Bernadette's, with its iron fences and high walls, full of frowning nurses and cruel attendants. A place meant to make her better, to cure her, though Wendy knows she was never sick at all. And here's the proof, standing before her on the end of her daughter's bed. Wendy straightens, hardening the line of her jaw, and meets Peter's eye. In the last 11 years, she's built a life for herself, for her husband and her daughter. She's not that lost and aching girl, and Peter has no power over the Wendy she's become. Peter. Wendy hears her own voice, stern, admonishing, the voice of a mother, but not the kind Peter ever wanted her to be. Before she can get any farther, Peter shakes his head, a single sharp motion, dislodging her words like a buzzing gnat circling him. His expression is simultaneously bored and annoyed. You're no fun. He spins as he says it, a fluid, elegant motion. Peter blurs and Wendy thinks he's about to leave, but instead he seizes Jane's hand. Never mind, I'll take this Wendy instead. Peter leaps, yanking Jane into the air. Jane lets out a startled cry, and Wendy echoes it, a truncated burst of sound. She isn't quick enough to close the space between them as Peter dives for the window, Jane in tow. Instead, Wendy falls forward, bashing her knee painfully and catching herself on the windowsill. Wendy's fingertips brush Jane's heel and close on empty air. Peter spirals into the night, a cockscrow trailing in his wake, so familiar, so terrible it overwhelms her. Wendy doesn't hear if her daughter calls for her. The only sound in the world is the ringing echo of Peter's call as two child-sized figures disappear against a field of stars. And that is how
And
the first chapter starts.
yeah, applause, applause. This is AC Wise reading from Wendy Darling, Wendy, comma Darling, and it's hinted here at one of the big themes here. This is in 1931, but then it goes back to 1917, where Wendy is actually put into an asylum by her probably well-meaning brother John, because she does not stop talking about Neverland. And that is, of course, a little bit um, hysterical, if you will. And as a matter of fact, I want to bring up this texture here real quick before we look at the Neverland that we are actually in, because co-producer Shyla has prepared a slide about hysteria, and this is a little bit of a theme also in your book, that women like Wendy, strong women, are well, we we have a history in our society of calling them hysterical, do we not?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you use the yellow wallpaper here, which is a perfect example of sort of, gaslighting, disbelieving, you know, saying that, as you say, women are hysterical if they don't agree with your worldview or they're the slightest bit difficult, you can just sort of put them aside and not think about them again, make them somebody else's problem. If you want to get married, oh well, she's crazy, lock her in the attic. It's a good staple of gothic fiction.
Yeah. And here, actually, here, this, if you look at this slide, there is a book, The Yellow Wallpaper. Actually, Shyla asked me if we wanted to talk about this, if you actually read this, The Yellow Wallpaper, which is about a the hysteria as it was called in the 16th, 17th century, and before that, it was actually associated only with women. When women went a little bit out of lockstep, it was called the wandering womb, because they figured
Yeah.
like, okay, it's got to be some female thing, so it's got to be something that men don't have. Oh wait, they don't have a womb.
Yeah, I've definitely heard that term before. I want to say that's where sort of hysterectomy, hysteria, there's some sort of connection there of the, woman's craziness coming from her womb.
And there is also hysteria today. And one more slide here about toxic masculinity, because also it's hinted in your excerpt right off the bat where it starts here, the way you introduce Peter, who just goes into Wendy's daughter's bedroom, Jane, and just grabs her instead. Um, this is, maybe I read too much into it. You tell me, but Peter is also a guy who thrives on toxic masculinity.
Definitely, there's definitely elements of that there. He sort of, I'm right. This is the way the world is. I don't want to hear anybody else's. He feels like he's owed things, including people's obedience to him. He doesn't particularly distinguish between really anybody other than himself. So I don't know if that's, it's a bit of toxic masculinity. It's a bit of him just being an asshole, where he doesn't really fully recognize that other people are valid and count and, you know, have any opinions that matter at all whatsoever. He's very much the center of his own world, and that's the way it should be.
Well, I guess toxic masculinity is only the term in academia for asshole, because they can't say it in the paper. Um, yeah, no, I mean absolutely, and a little bit later, I'm going to read a little excerpt here that I love, also from the middle of the book, which I mean, your language is wonderful here, where it's really illustrated how he I mean, he entertains the lost boys, but he also he is a bully. He's a schoolyard bully, and he makes fun of them, and it's harassment masquerading as entertainment, in a certain sense. Um, but before we continue, I would like the camera to show us where we actually are, because the folks on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, they don't even see where we came from, AC, because we actually came from a really benevolent, wonderfully brightly colored bedroom here on Book Club Island, and then from this bedroom that has really wonderful little uh, a butterfly collection, wonderful paintings on the wall, and of course Nana, the dog, the nanny dog. Um, and then we entered where we are now. We see a window. We see a window from the bedroom where Peter and a fairy are floating, and there's a little path, and the path leads us slowly but surely into another world that is quite a bit darker, which is a shipwreck. And at the entrance of the shipwreck is Tiger Lily, and Tiger Lily appears in in your book as well. On the side here, we have a crocodile staring at Captain Hook, and on the top of the shipwreck is a very strange looking Peter Pan twirling around. So this Peter Pan up here, if people in the room they can cam up, but the camera is looking at right now. This Peter Pan who is flying in circles around with his shadow separated from him, uh, are being watched by Wendy and her mother here on top of the ship. Now you include Tiger Lily in your story, um, but you didn't include Captain Hook, and I was wondering why. I mean, I guess Captain Hook was kind of killed in the original, but Tiger Lily is super interesting. So ta tell us about your the choices of why you included certain characters from the original and others you didn't.
Well, I will say that it's entirely possible, I don't want to spoil too much anything,
Oh.
but that there will be a companion slash sequel that might tell you what happened to Captain Hook.
Oh, I see. That's how the publishing industry works. They go like, "Hey, no, 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 you got to split it up. We got to."
Got to tune in to find out what happens next.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. I see.
Um, Oddly enough, actually, when I was writing Wendy Darling, it was just intended to be kind of a standalone book. But as you know, these things kind of tend to take a life of their own. I kind of started getting interested in the parts that I was leaving out of the novel or not covering in this
Yeah.
first novel, and that ended up being a second novel.
No, I
Um,
mean, I think that's completely
yeah.
legitimate. I mean, it's tongue in cheek. I mean, it really depends why these decisions are made. I mean, sometimes it's extremely obvious that commercial reasons are at the forefront of decision making, and sometimes it's just there's a richness of a world, of a story that really beckons to be fleshed out even more.
Yeah, I mean, Hook and the Pirates didn't really sort of fit with the story that I wanted to tell in Wendy Darling. And I really wanted to sort of focus on female friendships, hence Tiger Lily making an appearance as sort of, the only other real girl that Wendy encountered when she was in Neverland the first time.
Hmm.
And they did sort of have a friendship there, and Tiger Lily also had her own separate relationship with Peter. So I wanted to sort of explore all that, and the pirates didn't really fit in as much to that particular story, but I did think, their story was interesting enough to sort of explore separately. So,
Hmm.
hopefully folks will be interested and continue to follow along on that journey.
Here's actually a comment from earlier. Stella says here, I say about children are not always aware of the freedom childhood offers. Kind of before it's too late, I guess, is what Stella is saying. I mean, that's a good comment. Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like you never really, realize as a kid kind of how much freedom you have and how much weight kind of other people are taking for you in terms of protecting you and caring for you. And again, sort of the cleaning up after your messes. And then you look back and you're like, oh, wow, I really didn't have very many responsibilities back then.
Right. And here a little bit, people are commenting here also in the local chat. Stella has a good chat here about the origin of the story, origin of the character. And in the interest of time, I don't want to get too much into it, but we did prepare a slide here. It's up now. This is from a New Yorker article about J.M. Barrie. And here it says James worshipped his dead brother with a devotion that carried the taint of jealousy. Once he even entered his mother's presence wearing a suit of David's clothes. The residue of the calamity as it eventually seeped into Barrie's art was the conviction that a perfect child who dies on the eve of his 14th birthday will be spared the degradation of growing up, and that the death will be outshone by the thought of the perfection, so blindingly perhaps that the boy will seem scarcely to have passed away at all. Now, this is really interesting. This is the, uh, you know, Barry's sort of thought process and motivation. But what's interesting in your book is, like I said earlier, the it's I mean it's a double-edged sword. I mean, it's important to embrace imagination and the freedom as a young person and retain that as you grow up. But it's I mean, you gotta take some responsibility at some point.
Yeah, and I think there is sort of a danger in over idealizing
Says
there,
I,
which
who is wearing weird, uh, you know, uh, cartoon pants in a virtual world, and you are and talking to a corgi here with a
exactly. I mean, we
dragon
don't
here
really
at the
have
back.
the moral high ground in this conversation.
Yeah. No, but I mean, I don't know. I don't want to spoil this, and I'm not going to. But there is a part in your book which is extremely powerful, where let me put it this way, where Peter almost he manipulates Wendy, and what he basically says is, uh, Wendy, you're my mother, and mothers have to love unconditionally. And if you don't love my flaws and my dark side, then you are to blame. So tell me a little bit about that without spoiling like what the specifics are. But that's at really the core of this narrative, and it's brilliantly uh, executed by you in this book.
I think that kind of goes back to what you were saying before, sort of about the toxic masculinity and Peter's worldview in general. It's like, well, there's nothing wrong with me, and it's your responsibility to kind of accept all those things about me. And actually, there's nothing wrong with me really, and maybe you're just looking at things wrong. So sort of turning it back and doing that sort of classic gaslighting of, you know, you think you know how things work, but really you don't, and you should just listen to me and listen only to me and let me define your reality for you. Um, so much of Neverland for Peter is sort of him defining reality and not giving anybody else a say in it.
Hmm.
And that is definitely an element of that in that particular moment. And I don't want to say too much again to not really spoil anything, but um,
That's
yeah, I
really
would
it.
say
It's
that's sort
really,
of
I
a
mean, you said
manifestation of that toxic masculinity.
right, but also you use the term and you used it before too, and that's a brilliant, a term that I mean, we do live in an era of constant gaslighting. I mean, we see that a lot of actors, nefarious actors, are using this to perfection. The gaslighting technique, where they twist reality such that you sometimes believe, well, maybe I am wrong. Um, I took the book out, and I want to read a little one page here where to get a little flavor also from the middle. And don't fear, audience in AC, because AC is going to read an excerpt of a brand new story that's not even out yet. AC's a machine. She's also putting out a new story collection, so we're going to get to that. But I want to read here real quick because this is a powerful illustration of Peter's relationship with the lost boys. This is where he has just killed a boar, and they're roasting the boar, and Rufus is not eating. So it smells delicious, but Rufus is a kid here, and he's not eating. And here's Peter saying, "What's the matter, Rufus? Why aren't you eating? Peter's voice is sickly sweet, coaxing, as if he genuinely cares about Rufus and his well being. Not hungry. Rufus shakes his head, a violent motion. He rocks his body, arms still wrapped around himself, refusing to look up at Peter. The beat in her stomach turns, fear unsettling her, and she's afraid she'll bring it all up again. This is Jane talking. That can't be true, Peter says. His smile, like his voice, is honey, but the light in his eyes is dangerous. It smells so good. He tears a piece of meat free, straight from the boar, in a way that should burn his skin but doesn't. He steps close to Rufus, waving the meat under his nose. Rufus turns his head away, and the firelight catches tears welling in his eyes that he struggles not to let fall. I think Rufus feels bad for the boar. Peter crows the words, turning to flash a grin at the gathered circle of boys who now shuffle uncertainly around him. Tension strings the air. She feels it, a storm about to break, something terrible about to happen. Even though she swallowed it all, that meat feels as though it's sitting in her throat, a lump making it impossible to speak. I think Rufus likes boars so much that perhaps he'd rather be one than be a boy. What do you think? Peter's smile is triumphant. His eyes glitter, waiting for a response from the crowd. I think, Arthur hesitates. I think, Arthur clears his throat, making his voice louder. I think that Rufus should be a boar, and we should hunt him. Arthur darts a tentative look at Peter, waiting for approval. Yes, Peter claps his hands again. Excellent idea. Lightning quick, he darts forward, grabbing Rufus by the arm and hauling him to his feet. He spins Rufus around, pushing him so that he strikes the ground hard on hands and knees, tears spilling free, no longer just miserable, but terrified. Yeah, this is a passage of the palpable danger that these boys that are dependent on Peter. I mean, that they're his only you know uh, reference point, right? And they're completely, well, literally lost.
Exactly. And yeah, as somebody points out in the chat there,
Shades
I
of Lord
was
of the Flies.
definitely
Yeah,
Lord of the Flies. That was
yeah,
definitely an inspiration for some of the way they behave in Neverland. Peter is sort of constantly both seeking approval from the boys, but also sort of, wanting to order them around. He's a bully, but it's sort of a give and take in terms of like, yes, he's entertaining them, but he also sort of wants that love and adoration and approval back from them. And really anything that sort of gets that reaction, even though he's sometimes sort of almost forcing that reaction from them, whether it's like that sort of playground thing of, when the mob mentality gets going and people kind of start cheering on a
yeah.
fight when a weaker kid is being beaten up or something like that, or when everybody picks one person in the class to kind of, well, if I'm on the side of the people who are kind of bullying this kid, then I'm with the in crowd and I'm not the one being bullied.
Right.
um,
Exactly.
so
That's
there's very
almost like,
much elements of that there.
right. It's like Twitter every single day. Am I right?
Exactly.
Or Facebook, which I have deleted, and that feels so good. So now uh, if you're just tuning in, I should say, right, if you're just watching this on YouTube, you're stumbling across this. This is the Second Life Book Club every Wednesday, 12 o'clock Pacific time, 8 GMT. And our guest today is AC Wise with a wonderful book that's coming out June 1st, I'm told. Um, uh, and the pre-order link, please post it again, folks. This is out by Titan Books. Um, and comments in the chat. Ruby says if young kids behave like that, it's usually allowed and laughed off because they are just children, and boys will be boys. That's a really good point. And these boys grow up to be men, and it says, "Oh, men just be men," basically. And so this is how it sort of perpetuates itself in society. Stella says, I'm referring to Peter challenging his mother and telling her she must accept him for all his errors. Stella says here, how often have we heard our mothers say threateningly, just wait until you are grown and have children of your own, as a way to tell troublesome children karma will be a bite in the pants. Um, as a father of a 17-year-old, yes, good point. Uh, Damon saying something here. Let's see here. Jules says, I think it's weird that Peter is pushing Wendy into the mother role when there was an initial childhood romantic tension. This is a very, very good point. How about that, AC? I mean, there's probably tons of like, you know, theses and papers written about this. Uh, the romantic aspect of this that is never really explored.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like some interpretations definitely lean sort of more heavily into that, potential romance between them. And I think there, other versions have kind of steered away from that. And I decided I really wanted to focus more on the sort of, mother relationship, especially as, Wendy is kind of coming back to Neverland as an actual mother and how that changes her perspective of, a lot of what happened to her when she was there as a child. And while there isn't sort of a romantic relationship, she is still very much torn in that, she did consider Peter a friend at one point and really almost kind of her only friend and her first friend. So it there
Right.
is very much that sort of kind of two sides to their relationship and, causes her a lot of conflict as she comes back to Neverland.
I'm not aware if this was actually explored. If people know, please put it in the chat. That's something I don't know. I mean, I would imagine that this was maybe explored in a whatever it was, maybe a theater production or something like that, or maybe even a film. Now, I want to move on to your other work because the bummer about this weekly show is, I mean, these are really first world problems or second world problems, if you will, is that I didn't get around reading. I bought all the other books that are available from you for my pocketbook, and if the camera could zoom on the table here, there is my trusted pocketbook. I'm not getting sponsored by them, but this is really a cool device. It's very affordable actually, as far as e-readers go. And I usually don't like to e-read, but I'm getting into it. And I bought AC Wise's other books. There's a short story collection, and there is this book here that is queued up, the ultra fabulous Glitter Squadron Saves the World Again. Uh, Sounds absolutely awesome, and I'll get around to it. But the question that I want to get into here in the little remaining time that we have before you read us a exclusive story is is actually questions that we had for Nino Kibri, who was here last week, and we didn't get around to it until the post game. How important is it to you to incorporate non-binary, gender non-conforming characters into your stories? So speak a little bit about the importance of that for you, but also then how do you do that, um, not to fall into a trap of sort of shoehorning them in? So tell me a little bit about that in relation to this book that I haven't read, or any other stories that you have out or that you're planning to write.
Sure. Well, queer characters, non-binary characters, trans characters all tend to show up a lot in my work, and um, these are people that actually exist in the real world. It's like saying, how dare you shoehorn, somebody non-binary into life? And I know that there are people who feel that way. Clearly, they are wrong, but everybody deserves to see themselves reflected in stories. Everybody deserves to tell stories that kind of reflect their own experience. Um, and you could say the same thing. Well, why are you, shoehorning a straight character into to this
Oh,
story?
let me
Or
clarify real quick. I'm sorry to step on you. That's not what I meant. I didn't mean to say like, why are you shoehorning them in there?
Oh, no, no, no,
I
I know
I
that you weren't saying
I
that.
feel that no, no, but I realized, like, I just want to clarify. I feel that sometimes people uh do shoehorn all sorts of things in there for nefarious purposes. I think obviously that queer characters, non-binary characters should be way more represented, especially for young adults, but not exclusively so. But the question is, how do you put these stories together? I mean, how do you dream up these stories? And you're halfway through answering this in a way that I hope that you would, which is, why do I even have to think about it? They are in a diverse society. These are people who exist. They appear in the stories. I don't have to kind of artificially construct that universe.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, as you say, it's what I'm trying to do is sort of reflect that, you know, this is the way that society actually works. This is the way sort of, with queer groups of friends find each other and, having more than just one queer person in a story reflects reality. So to me, it's not, uh, I don't really get the way some people say that it feels forced to them. I mean, I think I know what you're saying in terms of, you know, you can handle a narrative clumsily, but what I'm trying to do, at least when I write, is just sort of to reflect the way things actually are. Hopefully,
Mhm.
but with also with space aliens and ghosts and monsters.
I think this is may also be just an issue of sort of, straight cis people that go like, "Oh, am I supposed to like put that one in there now?" I mean, I don't know. I could imagine that conversations go like that, where the publisher goes, "Oh, this stuff is polling really well. Can you just like put a queer character into your story?" I mean, I know this from the music and film business, the commercial side of it.
Yeah, I definitely know what you mean, where, it kind of feels like sometimes people are kind of like going down a checklist or, doing what they think is expected by a market or even, as you say, sort of disingenuously kind of including that kind of thing because they think it's trendy or, they're trying to be ironic about it or something like that.
Yeah, or maybe feel threatened that they have to put it in there now. The same thing, like, why do I have to acknowledge these people? Why do I have to write them into my show?
Exactly. Yeah. Whereas I just sort of see it as, reflecting the world the way it is, as opposed to, creating something that doesn't actually exist, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And I'm putting up a slide here that Charlotte prepared. You write for a website, the Book Smugglers, which is a wonderful site that I discovered through our research. And there is a column that you write women to read and also non-binary authors to read. So I encourage everyone to go to the Book Smugglers and check out. Or go through your website and then arrive at the Book Smugglers. And I put up this slide here of just a bunch of names of people that folks could jot down and seek out these um, authors that are non-binary authors and discover their work uh, and pre-order them. After you pre-ordered Wendy Darling, why not pre-order 5 books today? Um,
Buy all the books, all the books.
right? You don't have to read them; just buy them.
I mean,
Um,
it's lovely if you read them too.
uh, Now, before my producers get very nervous because I always go over time, and we only have you until the bottom of the hour, and normally we have to wrap at the top of the hour. But don't feel stressed out or anything because you're the guest here, and we want to hear an exclusive excerpt of a new story. What is the story? When is it coming out? Um, Please read.
Sure. So
Read to us, mother.
hopefully
Entertain
this is
us.
hopefully this is quick enough that I won't cause us to go over time, but this is going to be
No,
an
please. I just say this. This is tongue in cheek. This is I'm subtweeting here towards the people behind the scenes, and they roll their eyes. You take as long as you want, AC.
well, I will try to be efficient, but this is an original novelette that's going to be included in my collection, The Ghost Sequences, which is coming out in October. Unfortunately, pre-orders for that one are not up yet, but hopefully they will be soon. It is coming out from Undertow Books, and I will definitely share far and wide when pre-orders are available. It is largely a reprint collection, all sort of on the theme of ghosts and hauntings, and this is going to be the one original story in the collection, and it is called The Nag Bride, and I am going to read the opening section for you. Now it's your turn to tell one. Sophie swipes a piece of candy from Andrew's pile. He has more peanut butter cups, and they're her favorite. When he doesn't stop her, she takes a second one, giving him a mini Snickers in return. Andrew thinks for a minute, then glances around as if afraid of being overheard. They're alone at the edge of a small plot of corn, planted equidistant between his grandparents' house and their barn, where their annual Halloween party spills music and laughter into the night. Have you ever heard of the Nag Bride? Andrew licks his lips. Something in the way he asks it draws a shiver up Sophie's spine. Just the name is evocative, and she wonders, has she heard the story before? No, she would remember something like that. She shakes her head. It happened right here, Andrew says, a long time ago. He holds the flashlight under his chin. Shadows cut angles into his cheekbones and make the freckles spread across his nose look darker. His hair sticks up every which way, like a scarecrow. Sophie grabs the flashlight from him, shining it into his eyes like a police interrogation. Just tell the story. Andrew squints and they tussle for a moment until he has the flashlight again. Sophie pulls her knees up, wrapping herself more tightly in her blanket. The corn rustles in a faint breeze. From this angle, sitting on the ground and looking up, the tops of the stalks scrape at the stars. There's an unzipped sleeping bag spread beneath them and a thermos of hot chocolate to share. Everything feels perfect, and for the moment, Sophie can pretend that she's never been anywhere else. Andrew and his grandparents are her real family, and she never has to cross back through the trees that divide their properties to the house that's supposed to be her home. Everything around here was farmland back then. Andrew gestures, taking in the house and the barn. Despite herself, Sophie turns all the way around, and her gaze snags on the trees lining the border of the property. Even through their screening branches, the shape of her house is visible. It's completely dark, her father likely slumped in front of a silent TV, her mother at a local bar. She turns her attention deliberately back to Andrew, her best friend, her brother, and even though they don't technically share blood, who cares what her parents are doing? After ghost stories, they can watch a movie in Andrew's grandparents' living room, and if they get tired, Sophie can snug down in one of his grandparents' many guest rooms. His grandmother has told Sophie she's always welcome here. She's always safe in their home. Okay, Andrew says again, so a farmer is working in his field and he sees a horse outside the fence. It's a beautiful horse, and he thinks surely it must belong to someone, so he chases it. The horse goes into the woods and he loses sight of it. The farmer is about to give up when he sees a beautiful woman sitting on the ground. Her hair is black, and she has very dark eyes. Her feet are bare, and she's rubbing at them like they hurt. He forgets all about the horse and takes the woman back to his home. The woman doesn't tell the farmer her name. She barely says anything at all, but the farmer doesn't care. By the time they're back at his house, he's already in love with her. A flicker of shadow between the corn stalks catches Sophie's attention, the light breaking weirdly. Her pulse jumps, and for a moment she's certain there's a tall woman watching them. When she looks again, the woman is gone. Maybe somebody wandering away from the party. That night, the farmer hears someone moving around in his barn. It's not the same barn, Sophie says automatically. I didn't say it was. Andrew's tone is defensive, and Sophie is weirdly relieved that he seems nervous too. There's a delicious thrill to the thought that he's scaring himself with his own story. It makes it feel more real. Like the Nag Bride has always been here, and he's just telling something that's true. There was another barn here before anyway, and stop interrupting. Sophie takes another piece of candy, even though her teeth are starting to ache and she's full. Next month, she'll turn 12, and so will Andrew. This might be the last Halloween before they're too old for piles of candy and ghost stories. The farmer takes his shotgun and goes to look in the barn. It's dark, but he sees someone moving around, so he fires his gun to scare them off. He doesn't mean to hit the person, but as soon as he fires, he hears a woman scream. He runs to get a lantern, and when it's lit, he sees the black-haired woman on the ground. She's bleeding, and her legs are bent the wrong way around. Instead of feet, she has hooves. The back of Sophie's neck prickles, and despite herself, she turns to look at the corn again. A woman stands between the stalks, and as much as she wants to tell herself it's just a guest, deep down, Sophie knows the woman did not wander away from the party. She's always been right where she is, and Andrew and Sophie are the ones intruding. She opens her mouth to tell Andrew, but the woman puts a finger to her lips. Sophie's heart flies into her mouth. Blood drips from the woman's hand, but even so, she smiles. The man ties the woman up and leaves her in the barn. The next morning, he comes back with a set of horseshoes and tells the woman he's going to marry her. Sophie's still listening to Andrew's story, but she can't look away from the corn. She can't look away from the woman who shifts without moving, who suddenly seems closer and at the same time farther away. And the farmer holds the woman down and nails the horseshoes right through her hands and feet. Dark, coarse hair blows across the woman's face. Only it doesn't look like hair at all. It looks like a horse's mane. There's something wrong with her face. It's too long. Her eyes are too far apart. The woman points through the trees towards Sophie's house. Her father is in the house, all alone. The woman's dark eyes are a question, and Sophie should shake her head, no, 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 but she doesn't move. Soph, are you even listening? Andrew pokes her arm. She jumps. I saw. Panic scrabbles at her. The space between the corn stalks is empty, but something moves too fast between the trees. What? Andrew's eyes widen. Sophie clenches her jaw so hard it aches. The Nag Bride isn't real. But a tiny part of Sophie shoved deep down inside wishes she were. A ghost to haunt them is exactly what her mother and father deserve. Never mind, I thought I saw something, but I was wrong. The lie tastes sugar sharp, sour underneath, like the Sour Patch candies and the dwindling piles between them. Her stomach swoops, hollow and full, and for a moment, Sophie thinks she might be sick. It's not too late. She can still run and find Andrew's grandparents and tell them what she saw. And that same small, deep-buried part of her makes itself known again. Her parents don't deserve her help. More nights than not, an endless stream of people rotates in and out of Sophie's house. Her parents' supposed friends, coming and going with bright eyes and mouths open in laughter. No one is ever turned away, no matter what time of day or night they show up, because her parents always have time for everyone, except her. They don't even know or care where she is right now, wouldn't know or care if something happened to her. Sophie clenches her jaw even harder, her molars grinding together. Are you sure? Doubt edges Andrew's voice. Really. Sophie rises and deliberately turns her back on the trees, determined not to see. It's getting cold. Let's go inside. And that is the first part of the Nag Bride.
The Nag Bride. And wow, awesome. And this is from a collection, from an upcoming collection, and we put it on this, on the book stand. Shyla put this on the book stand in real time. The ghost sequences. We were not prepared for this, but now we put it up there. The ghost sequences out in August. The Nag Bride,
October, actually. Sorry, the date
October.
changed. Yeah, I don't have the
Ah,
exact release date, but it will be out sometime in October. And hopefully, pre-order links and the full table of contents will be announced soon.
wonderful. Really cool cover too, and scary. And the Nag Bride. Are there horror fiction sites jumping in glee for this story? We'll pick it up in the post game. I have to wrap it, and then we'll stick around till the bottom of the hour. AC, this was really so delightful. Thank you for coming here. Will you come back?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Will you come back tomorrow? Will you read? I'm turning into Peter Pan as it's happening. Oh my God, what's happening? Um, Thank you so much, AC, and thank you, wonderful audience. As it is our fairly new custom, please put in the chat what you're reading right now, or what you're planning on reading, or what you're excited about. Put titles in the chat as I'm running through the credit list. We have fairly new credit slides as well, where we can see what is happening. The Second Life Book Club is happening every Wednesday at 12 o'clock SLT, which is Pacific Standard Time, 8 o'clock GMT. And sometimes we actually have the Second Life Book Club at 5 p.m. when we have folks from the different time zone on. The show is produced by Strawberry Linden, Shyla the Super Gecko, and myself, location manager and master builder, Ruby Geek. I mean, do I have to say this again? Ruby was really has outdone herself with Neverland and the journey from the bedroom to the shipwreck. Some people didn't make the journey. I hear that this guy Damon Blackflag, who is our security guy, took him like 2 hours to come from the bedroom over to the actual ship. Sad but true. The avatars are made by Kralos and Silas Merlin. Special thanks to Marianne McCann, AJ McDowell, Arden Schwartzman, Brett Linden, Patch Linden, Theanine, all the moles over at Linden Lab, and the Lindens themselves. And don't we have a third slide? I thought we have a third one. But we have a sponsor slide. So let me put up the sponsor slide here. We actually have a bunch of sponsors. And one of the sponsors is Bad Unicorn. He's not here. We got Bespoke Caravan. We got Blueberry Creatures, Landscape Unlimited, Linden Lab, of course, Rag VR, Salt and Pepper, Slink, The Black Forest, Theanine, already mentioned him, and What's Next. Now, speaking of what's actually next week, right here on the show is Jonathan Lethem. And Jonathan has written a book that we already discussed last year called The Arrest, which I think is one of the probably the 10 or maybe 20 best books that I have read. It's a dystopia, utopia, a melange, mixture, whatever it is. It is super weird and absolutely awesome. So Jonathan is coming back next week at 12 o'clock right here on the Second Life Book Club. Please join us in the post game. And oh, I should say also that we are revealing the sandbox today on island number 2. That's it. See you all next Wednesday, 12 o'clock, right here on the Second Life Book Club.